Hi everyone, our group chose mental health outcomes for first responders following mass violence. We hope you like our presentation.
Here is a quick overview of our presentation. First, we will review the problem and its link to occupational health. We will follow with a case example and then look at resulting outcomes due to the exposures. We will then discuss limitations and current policy on the topic. We will end with community involvement and responses. For our project, we focused on mental health outcomes for first responders like EMTs, police, firefighters, and paramedics following traumatic events or emotionally disturbing or distressing events. To specify, our exposure of interest is a mass violent incident. We looked at the 2012 mass shooting of the Aurora movie theater. It should be noted that mass violence should not be reduced to just shootings, as first responders are also exposed to other traumatic exposures like the 9/11 terrorist attack, hurricanes, and many more. We evaluated mental health outcomes like PTSD, depression, suicide, stress, and alcohol and drug abuse that many studies show can result after traumatic events like mass shootings. Our project mostly focuses on the occupational health side, but it is important to note that large-scale traumatic events can have environmental impacts as well. For instance, events like 9/11 affect the mental health of first responders, but it also had a severe detrimental effect on the environment, along with our physical health as demonstrated by the graphic. For the sake of time and the scope of our project, we will focus on the occupational side of traumatic exposure. On July 20th, 2012, James E. Holmes opened fire in a Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, killing 12 people and injuring 70 others. In addition to physical injuries, many people suffered severe psychological trauma, including first responders.
More than 5 years have passed since the horrific tragedy. In this Colorado 9 interview, multiple police officers reflect on the event. Take some time to read through their accounts. Notice that many are still greatly affected or triggered by the event today. Many stated that it seems like it happened yesterday, or they think about it daily. Our group reached out to the Boulder Police Department in order to see what systems or programs were in place to support police officers and other employees after traumatic events, or even just to support the officers in general due to the day-to-day demands and stresses of the job. An administrative assistant, Lori Ogden, said the department is very proactive when it comes to good mental health and well-being for officers and employees. The department has its own employee assistance program, which provides, at no cost to the employee, assistance to members and their families with the resolution of any problem or stressful incident that affects their quality of life, either at home and/or work. It provides critical incident debriefings, consultations, and training as needed. The city also has an employee assistance program, which isn't as robust as the one the department provides, but is available to all employees of the department. They also have a peer support team, which consists of department employees, sworn and civilian, and a clinical advisor who are selected by the chief of police. They are trained to provide support to other department members who may be experiencing undue stress that might negatively impact their well-being. They believe prevention and intervention services may help employees maintain healthy lives, and this team provides easy access to those services. Most psychologists identify stress as a leading cause of psychopathology following a disaster, but theories as to how stress affects its victims are varied. The more stressful the disaster experience, the more negative are the consequences, but it's not always possible to identify which of the many factors within a disaster make it more stressful. Psychological impact of disaster has been proposed to be a function of intensity and duration of disaster, along with the vulnerability of the victims and resources available to mitigate these effects. A layout of these correlates along with the socio-administrative response is presented in the figure on the slide. The magnitude of the disaster, along with its duration, defines the impact on the victims of a terrible incident. Theorists have identified the following important characteristics of disaster: mass violence, the experience of terror and horror, duration of the disaster, and the amount of unpredictability and lack of control. First responders and disaster workers are at a special risk for PTSD and other negative emotional consequences of disaster. This vulnerability has usually been perceived to be related to the experience of the work, rather than to any inherent vulnerability factors, as often people choosing these professions have high levels of emotional hardiness. Disaster workers' experience of the disaster is often more long-term than that of other victims. In addition, the experience of helplessness and lack of control for successes is often distressing. Critical incident stress is defined as any situation faced by emergency service personnel that causes them to experience unusually strong emotional reactions which have the potential to interfere with their ability to function either at the scene or later. National disaster expert Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell's initial concept of critical incidents included 1. The serious injury or death of an emergency team member in the line of duty. 2. The serious injury or death of a civilian resulting from emergency service operations. 3. Cases charged with profound emotion, such as the death of an infant. 4. Cases that attract unusual attention from the news media. 5. A loss of life after a prolonged rescue effort. 6. Serious physical or psychological threat to the rescuers. Or 7. Incidents that surpass the normal coping mechanisms of personnel. This list has been expanded to include dealing with dead bodies. Critical incident exposures occur primarily in the event of emergency medical services, at which point emergency responders may be exposed, directly or indirectly, to chaotic, tragic, or gruesome circumstances. Rates of exposure to traumatic events have been reported at between 82% and 100%. This rate of exposure is much higher than for the general population. Only 61% of men and 52% of women reported exposure to at least one traumatic event. These events are often overwhelming to an individual, disrupting emotional equilibrium and overcoming normal coping mechanisms. Because of exposure to these occupational hazards, EMTs, firefighters, and police officers are at increased risk of developing a variety of physical and mental health issues related to their service and exposure to stressful incidences. They are at an increased risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol abuse, depression, and suicide. The rate of PTSD among all types of emergency responders is much higher than for the general population, and are between 6.8 and 7.8%. However, paramedics have the highest incidence of PTSD, higher than police or firefighters. Studies report that up to 22%, or more than 1/5 of paramedics, will develop PTSD. There are multiple scientific limitations when it comes to the research being done on mental health and guns. The main aspect is the fact that there are laws against activating for or promoting gun control. This is believed to be the cause of political agendas dipping into scientific research findings. Since data cannot be collected in regards to guns, it makes doing research on gun effects near impossible. There has been a movement to attempt getting public health workers the ability to collect data, not law officials. Challenges in treating mental health in first responders includes the work environment. The everyday work environment includes a range of stressors that have a high potential of adversely impacting first responders' mental health. Such stressors can include a lack of communication, inadequate support, excessive workload, and a high potential of exposure to dangerous situations. Another is work culture. In a profession in which physical fitness is usually stressed over mental fitness, the expression of emotions and fears after traumatic events is often considered unacceptable or a weakness. This may lead to substitute coping mechanisms, such as disassociation, black humor, or denial. Another is personal risk factors. Such factors include genetic susceptibility, a history of childhood trauma, a history of mental illnesses, and one's personal style of coping with tense situations. These factors can be predictive of consecutive symptomatic issues when triggered by an adverse incident. Possible solutions include early psychosocial intervention. This can include psychological first aid, psychological debriefing, and crisis counseling. Nationally, it feels there are few steps to increase mental health in regards to guns, even after tragedies such as the Aurora shooting. In New York, there have been attempts to pass a bill of both gun control combined with mental health laws, but this was heavily fought by the gun right organizations. The Senate also did not pass a law which would have allowed more extensive background checks on those buying guns. This was favored by as much as 90% of the American public. Nationally, there have been very little repercussions for the countless shootings we have seen in the media. Colorado has stepped up their gun laws in respect to other states. Colorado now has substantially stronger gun laws than all its neighbors. Of the 7 states that it borders, 6 currently have F grades on the Laws Center to Prevent Gun Violence's scorecard, while the 7th has a D. Colorado is now up to a C-, putting it in 16th place nationally. This was implemented by the community stepping up in order to take control of what they could. Colorado community members have been quoted saying, "We hate that we have to feel scared in places we should feel protected. We hate that we have to look at contingency plans and exit plans all the time. We want just to feel safer." This statement shows the impact that shootings have had not only on those directly affected, but the mental health of the community surrounding the shootings. When there are mass shootings, often there are disproportionate rates of increased PTSD, and often for those with lower socioeconomic status as well as race. This affects both the mental health of those who are perceiving anxiety around them and those who are being perceived. Specific to the Aurora shooting, it was concluded that laws may do more harm than good because they deter people from seeking needed treatment, undermine client confidentiality, and contribute to erroneous stereotypes, meaning those experiencing mental health may experience adverse trauma as well. A central aspect of collective trauma is post-traumatic reactions on multiple ecosystemic levels. This has been represented by concentric circles of vulnerability, with those most directly affected by the trauma or those closest to the victims at the center of the circle, moving out to lesser levels of exposure. First responders function in many community circles. Care should be taken to acknowledge their dual role, and interventions and access to resources delivered to the community should also be inclusive to this population. Regaining family and community equilibrium, healthy functioning, and sense of collective efficacy following a communal traumatic event contributes to the individual's well-being. A, the importance of paying careful attention to the trauma narrative. B, attending to the overlapping vulnerabilities an individual has experienced. C, developing different types of group interventions for those in the various vulnerability circles. D, helping spouses, parents, and community leaders to be open to different experiences and voices. E, encouraging community action-oriented growth that promotes a sense of belonging and addresses positive meaning construction of the traumatic exposure experience identity. And F, providing a long-term professional community coordinator to pool information and resources. The Aurora Strong Resilience Center was established as a response to the Aurora theater shooting. It is a free space of healing for Aurora residents whose lives have been affected by trauma of any kind. It provides individual and group counseling sessions, cooking classes, yoga, acupuncture, and a space where people can gather. And it is supported by the City of Aurora, Aurora Mental Health, and other grantors. With its icons, the public place of grieving appears to be constructing a new symbolic order within which the other can enter the personal space of pain and suffering of another. It appears to express unresolved grief as well as the altruism and solidarity learned from the growth of trauma. In joining others' grief, the individuals have an opportunity to express their post-traumatic growth by showing their solidarity and sharing the meaning of that death or disaster. Dedication of the 720 Memorial will be held on July 27, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. at the Reflection Garden, 1515 East Alameda Parkway, Aurora, Colorado. More information on the memorial dedication can be found on the City of Aurora's website. Here are our citations, which are ordered by slide number. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about our presentation, please feel free to reach out to any of our group members. Our emails are listed on this slide.